Imagine, after a long, tiring day at work, you just want to find a place to sit back, relax, and enjoy a good meal. Nothing fancy, just some comfort food to help you unwind. That's exactly what JD Vance, a well-known politician and author, thought when he walked into Jack's Diner in Columbus, Ohio, a local spot with a cozy atmosphere and a menu full of hearty meals. But as JD stepped into the diner, something felt off. It wasn't the ambiance or the decor. It was the eyes, the stares. The entire place seemed to go quiet when JD entered. The usual hum of conversations and clinking of plates stopped. Every single person in the diner, it seemed, had their attention fixed on him. JD wasn't a stranger to this kind of attention. He was no ordinary man in Columbus. His books and political views had made him a household name. Yet tonight, when he walked into this familiar diner, everything felt different. He wasn't just a well-known figure. He was suddenly an outsider, a subject of unwanted focus. The strange feeling didn't just stem from the eyes on him. It was in the air. The staff, usually quick to greet patrons, froze. A young waitress, probably in her 20s, hesitated as she saw him enter. She stood there, unsure whether to approach or not. After a moment, she cautiously walked up to him, but not with a friendly greeting. No. Instead, she had something unexpected to say. "I'm sorry, but we can't serve you tonight," she said, her voice careful, like she was walking on eggshells. JD, although a little surprised and confused, didn't react immediately. He tried to understand. Was it too late for dinner? Had they run out of food? But no. She didn't give him any reasonable explanation. She simply stated, "We can't serve you." A chill ran through JD as he processed what she had said. What was going on here? Instead of walking away, JD decided to calmly ask for the manager. The diners around him were still watching, but JD stood his ground, waiting for an explanation. He didn't believe that something as simple as a meal should escalate to a confrontation, but in that moment, it felt like something much bigger was happening. The atmosphere in the diner grew heavier, and JD realized that this wasn't just a minor inconvenience. There was something else beneath the surface. As he waited for the manager to arrive, JD couldn't help but reflect on his life and career. He had been no stranger to opposition, to heated debates and strong disagreements, especially in the political realm. But he never expected that a night out at a local diner would become a challenge. What JD was experiencing wasn't just a random incident. It was a glimpse into a deeper divide, one that seemed to permeate even the most ordinary of places. Was it possible that in today's society someone could be judged so harshly just for the beliefs they stood for? Could a person's political views be the sole reason they were turned away from a simple meal? As he stood there, the silence in the diner growing more oppressive by the second, JD couldn't help but wonder, was this what America had become? A place where even a simple visit to a diner could turn into a battlefield? A place where division and distrust ran so deep that even food became a point of contention? The questions didn't just stay with JD. The other customers, still watching from their booths, were likely wondering the same thing. What was happening here? Why had JD been refused service? Was it really because of his political beliefs? Was this what America had become? What started as a simple trip to a local diner was turning into a much larger story, one that spoke to the heart of a country grappling with division, distrust, and the increasing difficulty of finding common ground. JD's story was just beginning, but the lessons would last far beyond the walls of Jack's Diner. The minutes ticked by slowly. JD stood at the counter, the stares of the diner's customers never leaving him. The quiet was suffocating, and the air felt thick with tension. Every glance seemed to ask the same question: why are you here? JD wasn't a man to shy away from confrontation, but this was different. It wasn't just an issue of service, it was about something deeper, something that didn't have a clear answer. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the manager arrived. A middle-aged man, clearly trying to maintain a sense of professionalism despite the escalating situation. His eyes darted nervously around the room as he walked over to JD. The manager looked as though he had been expecting this moment, but perhaps not quite prepared for the weight of the conversation that would follow. "Sir, I'm afraid we're going to have to ask you to leave," the manager said, his tone polite but firm. There was no apology, no attempt to explain what was happening. It was as if this was a standard request, a routine procedure that had been carried out many times before. JD, not one to back down so easily, took a deep breath. This wasn't just about getting a meal anymore. It was about standing his ground, about seeking clarity. "Why?" JD asked, his voice steady but filled with confusion. "What's the problem? I've been here before. What's changed?" The manager hesitated, glancing around at the other customers before answering. "It's not personal," he said, his words coming out clipped. "But we can't serve someone with your reputation, you understand." JD's heart sank. It was like a punch to the gut. He wasn't hearing this. "My reputation?" JD repeated, trying to process what the manager had just said. "You're turning me away because of my reputation? For what? For speaking my mind?" The manager shifted uncomfortably but nodded, his eyes briefly meeting JD's before he looked away. "We just have to be careful. People don't want to see someone like you in here, and that's the truth of it." For a moment, JD stood there in stunned silence. What he was hearing didn't make sense. He had expected a more reasonable explanation, something he could wrap his head around, but instead he was faced with an answer that felt absurd, as if he was being penalized not for his actions but for his beliefs. Was this the world we were living in now? A place where expressing a point of view could get you banned from a simple meal at a local diner? The manager's words hung in the air, but JD's mind was racing. Was it really about his opinions, or was there something deeper at play here? Why was he being singled out in such a public way? He had been in the public eye for years, having written best-selling books and run for political office, but he never thought that his personal beliefs would result in being kicked out of a public place. The more JD thought about it, the more it became clear. This wasn't just about him. This was a reflection of something larger, something that was spreading like wildfire across the country. Intolerance, division, and fear. The manager's eyes remained fixed on the floor, avoiding JD's gaze, like he didn't want to be the one to explain what had really happened. JD could feel the heat rising in his chest. This wasn't just a disagreement. This was a silent judgment, a condemnation based on something far more dangerous than a simple difference of opinion. The message was loud and clear. If you don't agree with the majority, you don't belong. But JD wasn't about to walk away quietly. He had faced much greater challenges in his life, and this would not be the one to break him. "I'm not leaving," he said, his voice hardening. "Not until I get some answers." "What exactly is it that's so offensive about me?" The manager, clearly flustered now, looked around the diner at the other customers who were still staring, their eyes filled with curiosity and judgment. The tension in the room was palpable. JD's question hung in the air, unanswered. It was almost as if no one wanted to acknowledge the real issue. They all just wanted him to leave, to quietly disappear without causing any more trouble. But JD wasn't going to let it go that easily. "What are you afraid of?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. "Are you afraid of someone like me being here, a man who stands by his beliefs, regardless of what others think?" The manager, caught in a moral tug-of-war, sighed deeply, looking as though he was being pulled in two directions. He wanted to maintain the peace in his diner, but at what cost? JD's challenge wasn't just about serving him food. It was about confronting the deeper issue of censorship, of a society that was increasingly unwilling to tolerate differing viewpoints. The silence stretched on, and for a moment, JD thought the manager might finally cave and offer an explanation, or at least a more compassionate approach. But instead the manager turned, signaling to the waitress who had initially stopped him. "I'm sorry, but we have to ask you to leave," he said, his voice wavering slightly, almost apologetic. JD's resolve hardened. This wasn't about food anymore. This was a stand for something much bigger. He wasn't just going to walk away from this. He wasn't just going to let people hide behind their fear and bigotry. "Fine," JD said, turning toward the door, "but remember this. You've just made a choice. And so have I." With that, JD walked out of the diner, the eyes of the customers still on him. But this time, it wasn't the stares of judgment that followed him. It was a sense of triumph, because JD knew that what had happened here wasn't just a one-off incident. It was part of a larger narrative, a growing tide of division that threatened to tear apart the very fabric of American society. And JD, in that moment, understood the price of standing up for what he believed in. The moment JD stepped outside the diner, the cold wind hit his face, almost as if the air itself was offering a sharp slap, reminding him of the harshness of the world he had just walked out of. The door behind him slammed shut with a quiet finality, leaving him alone on the sidewalk. He could still hear the murmurs from inside, the soft clinks of silverware, the low hum of conversation that had abruptly fallen silent the moment he left. But none of that mattered now. What mattered was that moment, the choice he had just made, and what would come next. JD paused for a moment, his breath fogging up in the cold air. He was used to being challenged, used to being scrutinized by the public eye. But this was something different. This wasn't just a matter of a politician facing criticism, or a public figure caught in the storm of public opinion. This was personal. This was the kind of thing that made you question everything you thought you knew about the world. He looked back at the diner's window, the faint outline of customers still visible through the frosted glass, and then, just as he was about to turn away, he saw her. The waitress who had been part of the awkward exchange moments earlier. She was standing just inside, watching him through the window, her eyes filled with something JD couldn't quite place. Sympathy? Regret? Or perhaps something deeper, something he wasn't quite ready to understand. JD had been dismissed by the manager, but the waitress wasn't following the same script. She wasn't turning her back on him. She wasn't just another part of the system that had shut him out. There was something about her that made JD pause. A flicker of hope in a moment that felt overwhelmingly bleak. Without thinking, JD walked back toward the diner, his boots crunching against the snow-covered sidewalk. He wasn't entirely sure why he was doing this, but something inside him urged him to go back to try to understand. What did she know that he didn't? What did she see in him that made her linger, even for just a second, before returning to her work? He pushed open the door again, and as the bell above the entrance jingled, the low murmur of the diner's patrons resumed, though JD noticed that the eyes that had been on him before had now shifted elsewhere. But the waitress? She was still watching him. Her eyes locked onto his as he made his way toward the counter. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" JD asked, his voice a bit softer now. The waitress, who was just finishing up a drink order for another table, nodded, stepping away from her post and motioning for him to follow her toward the back of the diner. They walked quietly through the narrow hallway leading to a small break room. The hum of the kitchen and the clinking of dishes were distant now, but JD's mind was racing, trying to make sense of everything. Why had she lingered? Why hadn't she just let him walk away in silence like the rest of them? Once they were out of earshot, the waitress turned to him, her face serious. "You know," she said quietly, "they don't tell you everything. There's always a story behind it." She paused, glancing at the floor for a moment, as if trying to find the right words. "I've seen this happen before. People get pushed out, get shut down. But it's not always what it seems. Sometimes it's about more than just what's on the surface." JD raised an eyebrow. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his curiosity piqued. "Are you saying there's more going on than what I was told?" The waitress hesitated again, then nodded slowly. It's not just about you, JD. It's not just about who you are or what you believe in. It's about the pressure. The pressure from outside, from all the people who can't stand to see someone speak their mind. There are people in this town who've been trying to get you out of here for years, and they'll do anything to make it happen. JD felt a chill run through him, not from the cold, but from the weight of what she was saying. But why? What's the point? Why go after someone like me? The waitress looked around, checking that no one was within earshot. Because they're afraid. They're afraid of what you stand for, what you represent. You're not just a politician or a writer to them. You're a symbol, a reminder that things can change. That they will change, whether they like it or not. And some people, they can't handle that. JD stood there for a moment, trying to digest everything she had just told him. Was it possible? Could it really be that simple? Could there really be people out there so threatened by him, so frightened of what he represented, that they would go this far to keep him out? To push him out of a simple diner? To isolate him from the very community that had once embraced him? Is it really that bad? JD asked, his voice quieter now, almost resigned. Is it really that dangerous to be someone who believes in change? The waitress nodded again, her expression sympathetic but knowing. You'd be surprised. People like you make people like them uncomfortable. And when people get uncomfortable, they do crazy things. JD couldn't help but shake his head, still struggling to come to terms with the reality of what he was hearing. But then, as if a switch had been flipped in his mind, a thought struck him. But that's why I can't stop, right? He said, more to himself than to her. Because if I stop now, if I let them win, then what have I really done? The waitress smiled gently, her eyes softening. Exactly. You can't let them stop you. Not now, not ever. You have to keep going, no matter what they throw at you. JD took a deep breath, the weight of her words sinking in. This wasn't just about a single meal at a diner anymore. This was about something bigger, something that required him to keep fighting, to keep standing tall even when the world around him seemed to be crumbling. He wasn't just a man standing up for his own beliefs. He was standing up for something that belonged to everyone, the right to be heard. Thanks, JD said quietly, offering the waitress a small, appreciative smile. I needed to hear that. As he turned to leave, JD felt a shift inside of him. The world outside the diner still felt heavy, but now, for the first time in a long while, he felt like he had the strength to face whatever came next. As JD walked back out of the diner, the icy wind slapped against his face again, but this time it didn't feel as cold. Something had shifted in him. He wasn't just walking out into the night, he was walking out with a sense of purpose, with a newfound resolve that burned hotter than the chill that surrounded him. The words the waitress had shared echoed in his mind. You can't let them stop you. Not now, not ever. Those words felt like a jolt, like the spark that reignited a fire he thought had long been extinguished. But the reality of what she had told him, the truth about the pressures, the games being played behind closed doors, had sunk in deep. He was no longer just a man fighting to be heard. He was a man who had seen the forces working against him, and he wasn't going to let them win. JD could feel the weight of the world on his shoulders, but for the first time in a long time, he felt the strength to carry it. The streets of the city stretched out before him, the lights from the street lamps casting long shadows across the pavement. It was a city he had fought for, a place he believed in, and he couldn't just turn his back on it now. He needed to get back to his office, to his team, to put the pieces together. The plan had always been clear in his mind, but the pieces had never fallen into place until now. The challenges he faced, the people trying to silence him, they were just part of the game, part of the fight, and JD wasn't backing down. As he made his way through the streets, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, glancing at the screen. It was a text from his closest advisor, Lucas. The message was short and to the point. "We've got a situation. We need you back at the office, now." JD's brow furrowed. He knew it wasn't going to be good news, but this was what he had been preparing for. This was what it meant to be on the front lines, to be a target. He didn't have time to waste. He quickened his pace, his boots pounding against the pavement as he made his way to the office. His mind was racing, running through every possible scenario. What had happened? Who was involved? There was so much at stake now, but for the first time in a while, JD felt in control. The past few months had been a blur of uncertainty, but everything had shifted. The threats, the pressure, they no longer held the same weight. He was stronger than that. As JD entered the office building, the familiar hum of the fluorescent lights greeted him, but there was an unusual tension in the air. He could feel it the moment he stepped off the elevator. Something was different. Lucas was waiting for him by the door, his face drawn with concern, but when he saw JD, a flicker of relief crossed his features. "You're here," Lucas said, his voice tight. "We've got a problem. The campaign. Someone's trying to shut it down. They're going after us hard. I don't know who's behind it, but it's bigger than we thought." JD's heart skipped a beat. He had expected the situation to escalate, but this? This was more than just a few online attacks or whispers in the hallways. This was an all-out assault. "Where are we with the press?" JD asked, his tone firm but measured. He was already thinking 5 steps ahead. "We've got reporters breathing down our necks. The story's starting to spread and people are getting nervous. They're looking for anything to bring you down," Lucas replied, his voice edged with urgency. "They're even trying to link you to some scandal they've been digging up." "It's not good, JD." JD took a deep breath, his mind processing the gravity of the situation. This wasn't just a smear campaign. This was an attack on everything he had worked for. They weren't just trying to bring him down. They were trying to destroy the movement, the hope that so many had placed in him. But JD wasn't about to back down. He had fought too hard, come too far to let this kind of pressure derail him now. "We need to fight back. Full force," JD said, his voice unwavering. "If they think they can break me, they're wrong. I'm not backing down." He turned to Lucas, locking eyes with him. "Get me the files on every major donor, every piece of dirt they're trying to throw at us. We need to hit back hard, but we're going to do it smart. We're not playing their game. We're changing the rules." Lucas nodded, his face set with determination. "We'll get to work immediately. But, JD, you have to be careful. If they're this coordinated, it's not just a handful of people. This is bigger. There's a target on your back." JD's jaw clenched. He knew the risks, but there was no turning back now. He couldn't afford to be scared. He couldn't afford to second-guess himself. This was the moment he had been preparing for. It was time to fight for what was right, for the people who believed in him, for the future they had all dreamed of. "I'm ready," JD said, his voice resolute. "Let's take them down." As the team scrambled to prepare the next move, JD sat in his office, his hands gripping the edge of the desk. The world outside was closing in, but inside, JD had never felt more certain. He wasn't just fighting for his own survival anymore. He was fighting for something much bigger than himself. A cause, a vision, a future that was worth every ounce of effort. And he wasn't going to stop. Not now. Not ever. JD had never felt so alive, yet so exposed. The moment he walked into the conference room, it was as if everything that had led him to this point was about to come to a head. The buzz of his phone in his pocket felt like the sound of a ticking clock, each message drawing him closer to a moment that could either make or break him. There was no turning back now, no more hiding behind the shadows of doubt. This was the final showdown. Across the table sat the faces of his enemies. Faceless giants with their shiny suits, polished words and corporate smiles. They were the ones who believed they could control everything, pulling the strings from the comfort of their ivory towers. But JD wasn't going to play by their rules anymore. He was done being their pawn. "JD," said one of the men, his voice oozing with false warmth. "It's good to see you, but I think you know why we're here." His eyes glinted with an arrogance that sent a chill down JD's spine. JD didn't respond immediately. Instead, he met the man's gaze, unwavering. In his mind, JD was already 5 steps ahead of them. This meeting? It wasn't a negotiation, it was a war. An all-out battle to keep the movement he had fought so hard to build alive. He had come to realize that they weren't just trying to silence him. They wanted to erase the truth he had been speaking, the power he had ignited. They didn't care about the people or the cause, they only cared about control. "We've been watching you closely," another man spoke up, his voice low but dripping with venom. "Your little crusade might have worked for a while, but it's time to face reality. JD, the game is over." JD's heart raced, but he didn't let it show. He stood there, firm, like a rock amidst the storm. His thoughts were laser-focused. He knew what had to be done. No more dancing around the issues. No more pretending that a deal was even possible. He wasn't going to negotiate his soul. "Reality?" JD finally spoke, his voice calm, but there was a power behind it that caught everyone's attention. "The reality is, you're scared. Scared of losing control. You've been trying to break me, but you didn't count on one thing." He paused, letting the words sink in. "You didn't count on me fighting back." A silence filled the room, thick with tension. The men around the table exchanged uncertain glances, their confidence faltering just for a moment. It was a small crack, but JD saw it, and it fueled him. He knew they were losing their grip. "We've got the evidence," the man in the sharp suit said, his voice tight. "All of your financial records, your connections. We can bring it all crashing down. And don't think the media won't have a field day with it. People will turn on you, JD. They'll see you for what you really are." JD leaned forward slightly, his hands flat on the table. "You think I'm afraid of a few scandals?" He chuckled softly, almost mockingly. "I've faced worse. And you know what? It hasn't broken me, not once. But I know what will break you." The men shifted uncomfortably. The room felt smaller now, the air thicker. JD could see it in their eyes. They hadn't anticipated this kind of fight. They were used to bullying, to pressuring, to hiding behind their wealth and influence. But JD wasn't afraid. He wasn't going to bend. "You can threaten me all you want," JD continued, his voice steady and calm, "but you can't touch the people I represent. They're not going anywhere, and neither am I." At that moment, JD could almost feel the walls of the room closing in around him. He wasn't just defending himself anymore. He was defending every single person who had put their faith in him, who had stood by him, who had been a part of this movement. His mission was bigger than him, and it was stronger than anything they could throw at him. "You can't win this, JD," the first man said, his voice barely a whisper now. "The game is rigged." JD stood tall, his expression unwavering. "Then I guess I'll just have to change the game." The room was silent now, and JD knew he had them. The power was in his hands. It was no longer about trying to survive their attacks. It was about standing tall, about rewriting the rules of the game they had thought they controlled. This wasn't just a victory for JD, it was a victory for the people. For everyone who had ever been told they weren't good enough, strong enough, or powerful enough to fight back. JD had become their champion, their voice, and there was no turning back. Without waiting for a response, JD turned and walked out of the room. The battle wasn't over. There would be more obstacles, more fights to come, but for the first time, JD felt unstoppable. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for the truth. As he stepped into the hallway, he pulled out his phone. There was a text from Lucas. The press is on their way. Are you ready? JD smiled to himself. The press, the media, the world, they were all watching. And JD was ready. Ready to take back control. Ready to fight for what was right. He wasn't going to let anyone take that from him. No more running, JD whispered to himself as he walked out of the building. It's time to fight. JD's story is a powerful testament to the strength of perseverance, self-belief, and the ability to face challenges head-on. In life, no one can avoid difficulties, and sometimes we are faced with forces greater than ourselves. However, what matters is how we respond to these challenges. JD never chose to give up, no matter how difficult things got. Instead, he stood firm in the face of every obstacle and always maintained his belief in his goals. The first lesson we can draw from this is do not fear challenges. Resilience and courage will be the keys to overcoming any hardship. Another important lesson from JD's story is the self-confidence and power of perseverance. No matter how much pressure or threats he faced, JD never allowed external influences to shake him. He always believed in his ability to overcome, and it was this self-confidence that helped him navigate through every challenge. We, too, need to learn how to trust ourselves, because only by believing in ourselves can we unlock our full potential. This not only helps you overcome difficulties, but also creates new opportunities in life. Gandhi also teaches us that each person has a responsibility to those around them. He fought not just for himself, but for those who believed in and depended on him. When you feel responsible for others, that sense of duty becomes the motivation that pushes you through tough times. Sometimes, we forget that our decisions affect many people, and that is why we must always strive to protect those around us. Another lesson from JD's story is the importance of daring to change and not being afraid to take risks. JD didn't just accept the current rules, he actively changed them when he felt it was necessary. This shows that sometimes, to achieve your goals, you need to break free from existing patterns and dare to try new things. Creativity and the ability to change are crucial factors that help you go further and achieve success. So, don't be afraid of change when you feel it's necessary. Sometimes, all it takes is daring to alter your approach, and everything can turn out differently. Lastly, JD teaches us an important lesson about not letting fear control our lives. When JD said he would no longer run, it was a powerful declaration of not allowing fear to dominate him. Fear is just a temporary emotion, and when we can overcome it, we discover an infinite power within ourselves. This helps us realize that only by confronting every challenge without fear can we truly grow and achieve extraordinary things in life. Finally, JD's story reminds us that life will always present challenges, and we won't always win every battle. However, what matters most is that we never give up. Even when things are tough, even when we face failure, we must stand firm, learn from those failures, and keep moving forward. Remember, the greatest strength is not the ability to win, but the ability to persist and not give up in the face of adversity. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss out on our latest content. And I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you find today's topic intriguing, comment 1 below. If it doesn't resonate with you, comment 0. Your feedback helps us create better videos that match your interests. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.